All right, here's the lowdown. Well, one, Rod Torreson is a longtime and well-known Michigan poet. He hails from the west side of the state, the Grand Rapids area. He grew up on a farm in Iowa. Plain-spoken yet mystical poems draw on the landscape and traditions of the Midwest, which I've always really loved about Rod's stuff. MFA, he earned an MFA from Western. His poetry collections include A Breathable Light and The Ripening of Pinstripes, Called Shots on the New York Yankees, 1998. And I mentioned on the first one that that he did that Mikhail Horowitz, a good friend of mine, did the cover for his pinstripe Yankee pen. Rod, was that Yankee pinstripe one? Was that a wasn't that a City Lights book? Am I right about that? Or
City Lights? It was Storyline Press.
Oh, okay.
That did it. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah.
Yes, Storyline Press.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. Because I was staying at Mikhail's house, and in his extra bedroom, I looked at this book that was there, and it was your book. And so the next morning I said, well, why do you have a book by Rod? He said, I designed the cover of it. So,
well, that's interesting.
Okay, see how small the world is? And,
yes.
And it's even smaller right now because people from all over the country are on here. No pressure, Rod. So please welcome Rod Torreson.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, ML, that you invited me to read. And I also thank everyone who is in attendance this afternoon. Okay. Though I had, I grew up in Iowa. I listened to KIOA radio. Later on, it was, let's see, can't think of it. I didn't have this prepared to say, so I should just leave it off. KIOA. And I fell in love with music at an early age. Now, when I got in at my teenage years, I didn't have, I had my share of dates, but I never had, really rarely had what I'd call a girlfriend. Although there were a lot of songs that I fell in love with. And they kind of helped me through. And one of them was My Girl. And I'm going to read a poem about the Temptations. This is the one that ML has in his anthology. I'm almost there. Since you always threw yourself out there, David Ruffin. And David Ruffin was the lead singer. I mean, they had many lead singers, but he's the one that Robinson of the Imperials wrote the song, Smokey Robinson wrote the song for. So there was a connection there immediately. Since you always threw yourself out there, David Ruffin, in that drizzle called life, such as onto the stage for that impromptu audition with the Temptations. Maybe in the end, it was easy for NBC in the miniseries to throw the facts about, framed by marked black glasses while the other temps danced the labyrinth behind you. You would whirl around, throwing the microphone up with one hand, snatching it with the other, then hitting the floor with a leg split so crisp that before you'd rise, the other temps saw the fortune of the moon and stars breaking your way. Your extended hand offering it to the crowd. In the sun's turnaround time, you'd lunged into stardom. Or maybe after the opening riff with its climbing guitar notes that scaled the heart, you flung yourself into My Girl, which Smokey Robinson wrote just for you, your baritone, that gritty scuffle, going sweet as water over stones, so that 700 miles from there in Terrell, Iowa, cold wind at our ribs, the song would strike up a blue sky. I've got sunshine on a cloudy day, and when it's cold outside, I've got the month of May. My brother Dean, while the wind was reduced to a few breezy spumes, rigging speakers in our upstairs window so we could broadcast My Girl all over the block, teaching it to the trees, the flowers, even the crusty, world-weary sidewalks, as if their cracks could take on your other trademark, that break in your voice, so that even Burl Coleman, the old no-nonsense justice of the peace, who lived next door, would take store of your song, and her drapes would sway. So, though back in Motown, you were leaping into arrogance, traveling solo in your mink-lined limo, while the rest of the band hit the turnpike in a station wagon, with you going so far as to have your glasses painted on your limo, as you hurled yourself into everything but rehearsals, which you'd miss along with later on the concerts, in your drug-induced exile, all this leading to a hiss in your skillet that broke the crying stillness, and frost on the furniture, and you trying to sign away your lady friend's Lincoln Continental for $20 of cocaine, the temptation soon voting you out of the group. It was then, ironically, you'd show up at gigs, flinging yourself onto the stage for the shiny ache you cosseted. While for the temptations, the stage lights stung. For the audience weighing in with applause when you'd pry the mic from the new front man's hands for My Girl, or maybe Ain't New Proud to Beg, or Beauty's Only Skin Deep, or I Wish It Would Rain. And my God, did it rain. The boiling truth of it is, you died in a Philadelphia crack house. The limo driver then escorting you to a hospital. Instead, NBC tossed you out with the trash, so that beneath the strain of streetlights, fans saw your body being flung from a car into the ashen traffic, as if it were only what you deserved, and a funeral parlor pillow was all that you were after. Well, sorry, at one place. I couldn't find it all of a sudden. You know, I don't give that many readings, but before I do, I always think of a poet named Robert Francis, just a brilliant poet. And he wrote a book called Pot Shots on Poets. This was probably published 40 years ago. And in it, he said that nobody ever hears the first poem that someone reads at a reading. So I've always been kind of up against that, and not really thinking it's true, because I've been able to listen to and understand a lot of the first poems. So I'll just throw that out there. My second poem is called After Your Tour with Dylan. You finger the strings, Lucinda Williams, and sing Lake Charles. I just have to find it real quickly here. And Lucinda Williams is a daughter of now deceased poet Miller Williams, who a very accomplished writer who taught at the University of Arkansas and translated and edited many works. And Lucinda never gained a lot of success, probably, and at least commercial success until she was in her 40s, which is pretty unusual for someone associated with rock music. And Time magazine actually named her the best songwriter. This was about the turn of the century, best contemporary songwriter at that time. So here's the poem. After your tour with Dylan, you finger the strings, Lucinda Williams, and sing Lake Charles. Up on the stage, under a cowboy hat in a dance hall, your pretty head is a sky that carries its own clouds. Through your sleepy lips, I hear a voice so frayed and thin, it barely covers you. And even in a deadpan pose, you play it straight, singing about the man who had a reason to get back to Lake Charles, as if doing so could repair the sunrise. No guitar fraught with fancy as it quietly smokes out a melody. And though you make no mention of this, I can almost see you and your friend looking high into the sky over the courthouse for your place in Lake Charles, or coming in at the port of Calcaso Parish, the terminal with its flour and bagged rice, but not the two of you arriving on a hot blacktop in that yellow El Camino that takes a road through your song. And he turns to you with maybe his eyebrows ablaze and says the line you sing, as if going back could trim his shadow. And Lucinda, with wind in your heart as well, maybe you too want to go back to Lake Charles. You, this woman who looks like she doesn't have a home. And older now, maybe like the man of whom you sing, who comes off as at that age where you fall out of the ranks of the handsome. Then I think of you, Lucinda, while maybe you hang up your nylons in an effigy, and it's there you live, not the city of St. Charles, though you could coax it off like a blossom anytime in a song and hold it close a moment before you let it go. As you tell me, in the grain of a whisper, you don't write songs that nobody lives in. I have just, I think, three or four more songs or poems left, and they're not nearly as long as the first one. This is 1969, my only poem title that has a year in it, I think. And this is about let's see. Here we go. There was a girl named Barb, and she and her cousin and my brother Dean and I would spend a lot of time at a place called the Recreation Center in Terrell, Iowa. And this was right after Dean and I moved to Terrell. And she was a wonderful girl. And we were all just friends. Then I had the fortune of learning that she had a crush on me. Well, that messed it all up, and I blew it. I blew it. One date was all we had, but everything changed. We weren't friends or anything. And this is the poem that came out of that. This is about the spring of 1969. 1969. You touch that new beginning you never worked up that summer with the songs simmered on the jukebox at the Bluebird, its pretty waitress in the rhythm of her orders. A stranger once again as you walked up to the sliding screen, only you and the light bulb above us enthralled as she took your order. Her eyes wide seas, but without the old undertow to pull you in. It took you back to Cokes you had with her each day at a restaurant after school. You never learning until the Ouija spirit spelled your name. It was of you that she dreamed. Her cousin's eyes wide with the rightness of the board. By that time it was over. No fermenting kiss. After that, the jukebox killed you off. As a zombie sang about pleasured hands and yours held nothing but a coffee cup. And you kicked yourself for taking her to love and not even knowing it. As at the table, it's the time of the season for loving, left you with little but fighting off mosquitoes and picking over the blighted fries and learning that ice cream has shadows too, when you never felt so alone as you dropped another dime in the Wurlitzer, that wishing pond. Thank you.
So quiet.
Thank you. This next one is called I Can't Get No, and you can just about guess who it's about. But you'd be surprised to find out who else is in that poem. No, not me. That would be too big of a surprise. But Steve Allen, he had this series called The Meetings of the Mind. He was also a very good songwriter. And I've always had, even though I wrote a book of poems on rock music, I liked many kinds of music. Excuse me, rap, but I've never liked you at all. Probably because I fell in love with all those great soul songs. But he was also, Steve Allen was also a great songwriter, but he hated the Rolling Stones. And this poem will tell you a little bit why. It's called I Can't Get No. Mick Jagger pucker mugs for the camera, agitating Steve Allen, who tried to calm himself in the whirlwind of history so it would lie back down after he riled it for his PB show, Meetings of the Mind. Allen, a charmed tunesmith who'd write 4,000 songs, though as Jack Parr, who'd replaced him on The Tonight Show, would say, name me one. I'd have shot back. This could be the start of something big. Steve Allen, knowing his worst song was better than Satisfaction, for 4 decades had railed against the Stones song with a sneer that matched Jagger's as he pondered the frontman's old response to the tube. When I'm watching my TV and a man comes on and tells me how white my shirts can be, well, he can't be a man because he doesn't smoke the same cigarettes as me. And Jagger knows, of course, that it's folks like Steve Allen whose white shirt is always judged perfect by a black bow tie. Something is funny when the comedian in Allen smirks at Satisfaction. That song he knows is rubbish. Then recites Keith Richards' lyrics as if they were Shakespeare's, but with mock passion. I can't get no satisfaction, 'cause I try and I try and I try and I try. I can't get no. And thinks of Jagger's big lips and androgynous fuss of facial contortions, and tells the Stones how white their songs should be. Mick with lipstick flicked on, mirroring the girl he wants to hunt down. And Steve Allen, actor and writer with 1 Emmy and a Peabody and TV Critics Award and a Film Advisory Board Award, is not acting when he dies the next day after publishing a full-page diatribe in newspapers throughout America concerning the changing culture, which of course Jagger and the Stones in England do not read.
Hey.
Well, thank you.
You.
I have two more short ones, and I don't know, I can't see anybody right now. Can you see me? Oh,
Yes.
okay. And I won't really introduce these because I feel like maybe I'm talking too much between poems. But this is about, well, here I'm talking. This is about Ray Davies, frontman, writer of all those great Kinks songs. And he was down in Katrina when he showed what he was made of. A year before New Orleans is immersed in water, before city walls give way with a shrug, Ray Davies, former frontman of the Kinks, walks with his woman on the fringe of the French sector, close to Bourbon Street, walks from what some might call charming squalor, flesh and leisure, maybe a little twist of clouds in the sky. Surely he looks older. Surely his hard edges now take soft journeys down his jawline. Surely old songs like You Really Got Me get in his bloodstream. But then it's that opening riff all over again. When the power chords nearly derail as a car stops in the middle of the street, one thug at the wheel, the other testing his mugger's luck, creates haste, and with a shotgun fresh in each face snatches her purse as if it's on clearance. The whole street sold to darkness, and Ray, in his prickly inequality from being at the top, explores the bottom. Caution doesn't churn, but instincts rush him as he gives chase to the mugger's small horizon before lead pummels him, his right thigh leaping out behind, leaving in one place his remainder. Ray Davies, shaker of death, at ease with being unsettled again, down on the sidewalk and not even sharing the seed of a scream. And the last poem is for Janice, who shouted out entire canyons in her songs. And I mean, I loved the blues singer, blues rock singer, Janis Joplin. And she had a lot of bad things in her life, and it all came through, I think, in probably about every song she sang. And I have the epigraph is from her. I'm a victim of my own insides. There was a time when I wanted to know everything. What Janice behind her granny glasses knew, as she belted out cosmic blues, her hands wringing out the last smidgens of lift from the embroidered tablecloth she wore as a dress, was there are questions we can never come back from once we've asked them. It all comes back to what we remember, neatly sawed and stacked like timber, suddenly coming undone and being flung out into the universe. Breathing full mouth at the cavernous mic and flagging cosmic matter, Carl Sagan only dreamt about. She'd cry, I keep moving on, but I never found out why. While flashing before her the ugly man contest she won but never entered in college, now hurling her blues higher, way out beyond those dismissive of roses, until for an instant the blues gave up in her grasp, echo her whimper dying to that monster of silence, her love raw, full to the tipping point of her breasts. Well, I thank you all so much for listening to me for a little while. Appreciate it so much. Yeah.
Rod Torreson. Thank you, Rod. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Next up is Linda Nemec Foster, poet and writer, author of 11 poetry collections, including the critically acclaimed books Amber Necklace from Gdansk and Talking Diamonds. Her most recent book is the Michigan Notable 2019 winner with Anne-Marie Uman, The Lake Michigan Mermaid, published in over 350 magazines. She was a poet laureate of Grand Rapids, as a past poet laureate, as was Rod. She is also given a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Dyer Ives Foundation for Poetry and Advocacy of Literature in Michigan. And in 2018 and 2019, she won the Editor's Choice Award for the Allen Ginsberg Poetry Contest, sponsored by the Paterson Poetry Center. Her and her husband, Anthony, are founders of the Contemporary Writers Series at Aquinas. Please welcome Linda Nemec Foster.
Thank you. Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, wonderful. First of all, thank you, ML, for putting this together. This is wonderful to read with dear friends Rod and dear friend Maria. I want to also thank the Detroit Writers Guild and New York City's Poets and Writers for sponsoring us. And I'm going to begin straight up with the Detroit poem. And even though I live in West Michigan now, many people don't know that I lived for quite a while in Detroit, always south of 8 Mile. I started writing poetry in Detroit. I studied with Ken Michalowski and Faye Ignace at Wayne State. And so the first poem I'm going to read is going to take me back to the D, and it's also in ML's great anthology, Respect, that he edited with Jim Daniels. So all you need to know about this poem before I begin, it's about dancing to various music. And I mentioned a dance called the Chicago Hop. I don't even know if there is such a thing, but we used to call it in Cleveland the Chicago Hop. All you need to know, it's a very fast polka. And the only person I knew on the planet who could really dance it well was my Uncle Johnny and his wife, Aunt Irene. So when you hear the Chicago Hop, you know what I'm talking about. So, dancing with my sister for Deborah. We're not talking those crazy Polish weddings in Cleveland where we both learned how to dance, clutching each other's sweaty hands, galloping to the beer barrel polka, and trying not to bump into Uncle Johnny and his whirling Chicago hop. This is now, tonight, in a smoky bar in Detroit, where two women dancing together can scandalize any pimp within range, where the hotshot bartender can mix anything and has the wide eyes to prove it. Bloody Mary, wall banger, a zombie with a spike of lime that will raise the dead. Above the crowded dance floors, in the maze of catwalks, the geek of a lighting man who reminds us of every boy in high school who fast danced with his hands behind his back, shines the spotlight right on us, and we glow. Girl, do we glow. Not for the memory of those distant high school boys whose faces we can't remember, not for the fluid desire ebbing around us on the floor and beyond where silent men sit in the dark. We glow for the raw truth of Aretha's voice spelling out respect. Our girls down past our shoulders, for our legs that can outdance any young thing, for the miracle that we survived our childhoods, mothers' obsessive cleaning, fathers' factory shifts, the Irwin Street mob of pre-juvenile delinquents. We glow because we came from the same burnt out dream of second-generation immigrants and learned to smile at the closed mouth of loss and dance, dance, dance. It was wonderful to tip a hat to ML and his great anthology called Respect of Detroit Music. I also want to bow to Maria Mazziotti Gillan, one of our readers. This next poem I'm going to read, I only read once before, and that was in February when I read at the Poetry Center on the invitation of Maria. This poem was a Editor's Choice winner for her Allen Ginsberg Poetry Contest. So it's only been read once, but Maria, thank you. Thank you so much for shining the spotlight on this one. And it's also about music, but not Detroit music, my father's music. And I'm going to talk about Dean Martin in this poem with his famous song, Sway. I'm going to talk about Benny Goodman and an old big band song, Begin the Begin. Very exotic. I love that song. And then a song that probably not too many people know because it's a Polish Christmas carol from Europe called Lulajże Jezuniu. It's a lullaby, a Christmas carol. And basically this is about my father, but it's like a chronology of him in reverse. So I begin with his death, imagine him meeting my mother, and I end with his birth. So this is called My Father's Music. Halfway around the world in Istanbul, I remembered him, my dead father, my silent companion, as I traveled through time zones of grief. Who else was responsible for that group of 3 musicians in the restaurant near the Blue Mosque playing Sway, his favorite Dean Martin song? Out of nowhere, floating like an instrumental coda, violin, zither, and frame drum, caressing the evening air with hints of intimate back notes and ballroom positions. When the waiter serving Turkish tea bowed and murmured my name in an unexpected language, I wept. Flashback to the night he met my mother. Back from the war with his Navy swagger, he notices her at a mixer at the Polish Falcon Hall in Cleveland. One look and they start dancing to Begin the Begin. Benny Goodman's haunting clarinet cuts through the usual banter as he slips his arm around her waist. At first, she doesn't hold his hand, just lightly touches his wrist as she tries to imagine a night of tropical splendor. Pearl Harbor, Guam, the Solomon Islands, New Caledonia. He whispers the places he's seen, the places he's survived. She takes his hand, kisses it. On the day my father is born, his father celebrates by remembering a song he once knew in the old country. Gone are the steel mills and the polluted air that glow orange every night above the dark roofs. The man only hears the song of the mountains and rivers, the long grasses and Mazovian willows. A lullaby, Lulajże Jezuniu, the Polish Christmas carol, as if this is Mary's son, the chosen, the anointed, the true. Late in the year and the night is full and clear. The father of my father stands by his sleeping wife and begins to sing, not to her, not to his son, swaddled by her side, but to the moon, filling the window with a cold silver light. Since I have a poem about my father, I have to have a poem about my mother. Next 3 poems I'm going to read are from my new book, The Blue Divide. It'll be forthcoming from New Issues Press in spring of 2021, and I'm very honored and humbled that they'll be publishing it next year. Thanks, shout out to Nancy Eimers and Kim Colby. And this next poem about my mom is about her fascination with movie stars. I mean, so I'm going to be talking about people like Ava Gardner, Greta Garbo, Jean Harlow, Joan Crawford, Ingrid Bergman, they need no introduction. We know who these great women are in film history. And two things I need to mention is back in the day, there was a product called window wax that was used to clean windows, kind of like a Windex of the now, but a window, it was called window wax that my mother would use. And I talk about, remember in the first poem, her obsessive cleaning. This is the poem where the details come in, folks. Also, there was a product called Prussian Blue. It was this blue powder that you would put in a washing machine. It would make the water all blue, but it would turn shirts the white of a Steve Allen shirt. I mean, these shirts were like absolutely, it was miraculous how blue water could make a shirt white, but it did it. So this is my mother and her love affair with movie stars. And it begins with the epigraph from Ava Gardner. And the title is called A Kiss is Just a Kiss. And here's the quote from Ava Gardner talking about show business. It's the kissiest business in the world. You have to keep kissing people. Ava Gardner. My mother, in her own words, didn't know much, but what she knew, she knew. How to darn a sock's hole until its universe imploded into a white dwarf of string theories. How to polish window wax into a mirror until it reflected a gaze more intense than Snow White's stepmother. How to magically stir the cauldron of laundry to transform Prussian bluing into a pure white shirt. And then her encyclopedic knowledge of movie stars. She never called them actors or actresses, but stars, as in the heavens, the constellation, the Big Bang. Her lessons were taught by chain-smoking gossip columnists. She pored over, illuminated in the pages of Confidential, The Lowdown, Hush Hush, and Uncensored. My mother could tell you how Jean Harlow really died. It wasn't kidney failure, but she was poisoned by all that peroxide she used on her hair. How Greta Garbo brushed her teeth. She never used toothpaste, only salt. How Joan Crawford plucked her eyebrows. She didn't, enough said. My mother loved the backstabbing of it, the kiss and tell of it, the guilty pleasure of it. And when she read this quote from Ingrid Bergman, quote, "A kiss is a lovely trick designated by nature to stop speech when words become superfluous," my mother, with her blue hands and absent husband, almost believed it.
Love that one.
Thank you, Jennifer.
I miss you.
Hello.
Hello.
I am going to read another poem from The Blue Divide. And I really like to dedicate this reading to all who have passed, who mean a lot to me, including Liesl Mueller, the great Liesl Mueller, the poet who died in February, dear friend, mentor, almost like a member of my family. And also this next poem is about the Japanese artist Hokusai. And this is dedicated to my dear friend Therese Becker, who loved Hokusai and loved his work and believed in reincarnation. And so this next poem is also for her, Mount Fuji. My friend always wanted to see the mountain with its eternal snow, but she never crossed the ocean to Japan. Instead, she bought a small reproduction of Hokusai's Boy Viewing Mount Fuji and hung it on her bedroom wall. Every morning, it greets the daylight, the boy with his back to her as he faces the mountain and plays a flute, his body perfectly balanced on a thick, tree branch that seems to slice Fuji's heart with a rugged abandon. In another life, she vows, I'll come back as that flute, the hollow reed content to be held and hidden in the boy's hands. I'm going to read a couple of short pieces. They're actual prose poems. I've been working on a new manuscript of prose poems, flash fiction, microfiction, shorts, whatever you want to call them. And it's a manuscript tentatively titled Bone Country. I write about Therese never being able to go to Japan. And my husband and I have really been fortunate to travel a lot. Just last October, I spent the whole month in Poland teaching there at an English language seminar at a university near Krakow. And I don't know if we'll be able to travel much again in this new world. But when I would travel, I would keep a journal, but it wasn't a travelogue. It was a sequence of things that I saw or people that I saw. So these next two pieces are from that manuscript in progress, two short prose poems. And this one is called Gemini Marks the First and Second Hour. In the huge brick church in Gdansk, just to the left of the main altar with its ornate triptych, you can see a medieval clock that marks the hours with the signs of the zodiac. My husband and I look like the Gemini twins who announced the first and second hour. There we are, holding hands and offering each other loaves of bread. At the center of the clock's face are the sun, signs of the water bear, ram, fish, and bull float around the clock as if in some imagined and pagan night sky. Scorpio of my son, Leo of my daughter, Virgo of my mother, Libra of my father. Astrology holds center stage. Where does one belief system go when another takes its place? Does it retreat underground, or does it mark the hours near the high altar on the edge of the Baltic Sea? Even the Black Madonna, posing with her son for the tourists, can't answer the questions. She is assigned a side chapel, while another man and woman grow from the serpent's tree in the garden of good and evil. Just one more from this new manuscript of short fiction, then I'll end with two other poems. I'm really thinking a lot about the past and the living and the dead. Maybe it's because of COVID-19. Maybe it's because of all the self-reflection that we go through. But this next poem is about my best friend from graduate school. I met her in Vermont at the MFA program there, where I met Liesl Mueller. Her name was Lara Gabrielle, and she died much too young of leukemia in 2012. And she married a UN diplomat. So when they had the memorial and celebration of her life, it was in Switzerland. And I was very honored. Tony and I, we both went, and I did a poetry reading in honor of her. And this is a piece about that. And it's called Scattering the Ashes on Lake Geneva. He plans the memorial exactly 1 year after she died. The quiet death in Brussels that left him alone. She died while he slept, while the whole city slept, a single tear in the corner of her eye. He tried to collect it in a linen handkerchief before it could evaporate, but what good would that do? She was already part of the air. Better to think ahead, cremate the body, and plan for the memorial service far away. She wanted a lake, and a lake she will get. the cold and pristine waters from the Alps in Lake Geneva, Geneva of the expensive lipstick, Geneva of the UN diplomats with security badges and pressed suits, Geneva of the Geneva of the hushed rain where he first met her, that woman who is now being scattered on the lake's calm surface. For a long time, she does not sink. Her ashes cling to the surface, asking one more question of the current under him. Thank you. I will end my reading with 2 more poems. And people have asked me if I'm reading a lot of, or writing a lot of COVID-19 poems. I have a couple of them, which I'm not going to read now, but I've really been thinking a lot of the 1918 flu pandemic. And what's amazing is we really don't know that much about it in the culture of America, and I don't know why. It's only recently that people have been talking about it. Well, in my family, in my mother's family, there was a child who died. And so that really affected my family's history, that awful pandemic. And a lot of people don't know how brutal it was. There were as many as 100 million people worldwide who died from 1918 to 1920, almost 700,000 Americans. It killed, this pandemic back then killed more people in 24 weeks than AIDS killed in 24 years, more in a year than the Black Death killed in a century in Europe. And what amazes me is how little, unless you do research, it is in our consciousness. And I found out that Faulkner and Hemingway and Fitzgerald all lived during that time and hardly wrote about it, which I think is the oddest thing. So this next poem is actually a very, very new poem. It's in the form of a halabun. And a halabun is an ancient Japanese form created in the 17th century by the great Japanese poet Basho. And it's basically a short prose piece and ends with a haiku. And this is about my mother's family, and it's called The Forgotten Dead. Why didn't Faulkner or Hemingway or Fitzgerald write about them? The forgotten dead that were buried in mass graves during the 1918 flu epidemic. Were they distracted by the Deep South and its streams of consciousness, the dazzling choreography of a bullfighter, or the brash metaphor of the Jazz Age? Were they too busy with living to pay attention to the death statistics? 50 to 100 million dead worldwide, almost 700,000 dead in the US. Too busy to notice the stranger with his bluish facade and distressing cough, the blood in the corner of his mouth, and the lungs trying to remember how to work. Beyond their typewriters and desks, 20,000 dead in New York City, 20,000 dead in Philadelphia, 10,000 dead in Chicago, and in Cleveland, almost 5,000 dead, including my mother's sister, 18 months old and barely beginning to speak, Bertha of the silent face. Our 3 famous writers didn't imagine her in those 3 days it took for her to die. And the only photograph I have of my mother's family, she sits stoically with a blank stare on my grandmother's lap, her body already disappearing into the whiteness of shroud. Before my mother was born, her small sister fades, light, memory, dusk. And the last poem I will read is also a little call out to Rod. a number of years ago, late 90s, Rod and I organized a program for the Grand Rapids Art Museum based on ekphrastic art. Me, Rod, Miriam, and a few other poets took part of this. And this poem, a short poem that I'll end with, also refers to that little girl who died, but also in that same year, another sister in that family died, but of a playground accident, not of the flu pandemic. So anyway, it's based on a painting that was done in 1918, which was the year of the pandemic. All you need to know, it's a frozen harbor in Provincetown, Massachusetts, with boats in the frozen harbor. That's the painting. And this is called Contour of Absence, after the painting Provincetown in Winter 1918 by Garrett Award. And Award was the Michigan artist. Is this what the new world has given us? A place of broken ice, its center of negative space, devoid of real color, except for the dreamlike mauve, teal, and red of boats locked and listing in their quiet sleep of winter. Halfway into the continent, in a place of factories, not boats, my mother is being conceived by her immigrant parents, not for love or passion or longing, but to erase the contour of absence, the silhouette of two daughters who died the previous year. By illness or accident, it makes no difference. The death of a child releases one's soul and enslaves all others. The mother forgets to brush her hair for weeks. The father can barely remember how to walk down his street. But how can my mother know this, starting the thin journey to her life? And how can the winter with all its snow and ice mask true sorrow when everything in this frozen universe hopes for spring? The two boats leaning into each other as if in unmarked graves, the sky gray and calm, waiting to be born. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
It was great, Linda.
Thank you,
Ellen
honey.
Foster.
Thank
It was
you.
beautiful. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you.
That was great.
Lovely, just lovely.
Next up, or the final reader for today, is Maria Mazziotti Gillan. I think a number of you are familiar with her on this video or this program. She has a number of books out, numerous books. She's won many awards, and she runs and founded and still runs the Paterson Poetry Center, where she puts on great readings and workshops. And she's always writing great stuff. So I'm looking forward to hearing what she has to read today. And please welcome, live from Paterson, New Jersey, Maria Mazziotti Gillan.
There I am. I wanted to say to both of you that your readings were wonderful. The poems were beautiful and heartrending, and I thank you so much. Is that Pam over there, the beautiful one? Okay, I'm going to start with a poem which I realized today was published in 1984. Public School number 18, Paterson, New Jersey. Miss Wilson's eyes, opaque as blue glass, looks at me, fix on me. We must speak English, we're in America now. I want to say I am American, but the evidence is stacked against me. My mother scrubs my scalp raw, wraps my shining hair in white rags to make it curl. Miss Wilson drags me to the window, checks my hair for lice. My face wants to hide. At home, my words smooth in my mouth, I chatter and proud. In school, I am silent, groped for the right English words. Fear The Italian word will sprout from my mouth like a rose. Fear the progression of teachers in their sprig dresses, their Anglo-Saxon faces. Without words, they tell me to be ashamed. I am. I deny that booted country, even from myself. Want to be still and untouchable as these women who teach me to hate myself. Years later, in a white Kansas City house, the psychology professor tells me I remind him of the mafia leader on the cover of Time magazine. My anger spits venomous from my mouth. I am proud of my mother dressed all in black, proud of my father with his broken tongue, proud of the laughter and noise of our house. Remember me, ladies, the silent one. I have found my voice, and my rage will blow your house down.
Wow.
And I'm not going to talk between poems. I'm just going to read you my poems. You either like them or you won't. I'm going to say one thing is that this is a poem about my son, who's an attorney and who's an arch conservative and an arch liberal. You can imagine our political conversations don't go well. What I can't face about someone I love, that my son loves me, but would prefer not to see me too much. Every Sunday night, when I call him in North Carolina, where he lives with his wife and 2 children, I can hear the heaviness in his voice, his hello tempered with impatience, our conversation stiff and stilted. They always think I can talk to a stone. Strangers in buses and trains tell me their life histories. Acquaintances tell me about their affairs and shattered marriages. Show me the secret undersides of their lives. My graduate students vie for my attention. They want to sit next to me and carry my bags and fetch my lunch. But my son can't wait to get off the phone with me. I ask him how the children are, or specific questions about school, ask him about his wife, his job. He answers with 1 or 2 words. They're okay or fine or the same. My son is a lawyer. He was always brilliant with language, just least written language, and he can read a 300-page book in an hour and remember every detail. But with me, he turns mute as a stump. If I ask for help with some legal problem, of course he will give it, but I do not hear in his voice the lilt I hear in my daughter's voice when I call her. Instead, I hear reluctance, as though his attention were focused on some truly fascinating person, and he can't wait to get off the phone. I tell stories that I hope will amuse him, but finally, after struggling and finding no response, I can't wait to hang up. I say, well, John, have a good week. Give everyone a hug from me. I know my son has divorced me somewhere deep inside himself in a place he doesn't look at. I am too much for him, too loud, too dramatic, too frantic, too emotional. I laugh too much. I wear him out in a minute and a half. If he never saw me again, he would miss me. And this is what I can't face about someone I love. And this is a poem. I read a lot about social class, and this poem is more about social class than anything else. 90s. At my bridal shower, someone gave me a pink see-through nightgown and pink satin slippers with slender heels and feathers. The gown had feathers on it too. I always hated my legs, and even then when I was still thin and in good shape, I didn't want to wear that nightgown or slippers, didn't want to parade in front of you like some pinup. But I wore them all anyway, all those negligees I got as shower presents, sleazy nylon. I didn't know it was tacky. When I wore shorty nightgowns, I'd leap into bed, afraid you'd notice how the nightgown revealed what I thought my biggest flaw. In all the young years of our marriage, I wore a different nightgown every night, not that it ever stayed on for long. And afterwards, I'd pull it back on, afraid our children would find me naked in our bed. I felt so sophisticated in those nightgowns, like the ones Doris Day wore in movies. Only years later, my daughter buys me a nightgown made of soft and smooth blue silk. Do I realize that the first ones I owned were cheap imitations of this, the one I hold now to my cheek. Grateful to have been once what I was. How lucky I am to have loved you in nylon, in silk, in my own incredible skin. I'm going to move on to another book. And I'm going to poem about my mother, who could be hypercritical, I have to say. Anyway, the Little General. My brother called my brother called my mother the Little General when we were teenagers. My brother driving the car, my mother sitting next to him, her head a small dark knob, barely reaching the top of the seat. My bossy mother who told us how to live our lives, my mother who was always moving. And when I remember her, I see her almost as a blur, like the cartoon The Roadrunner. My mother who washed all the dishes as soon as the last bite of food vanished from the plate. My mother who held my doctor brother's foot until he fell asleep when he was still a boy. My mother who sat us at the kitchen table with us, always ready to hear the stories of our lives, ready to tell the story of hers. My mother who told me everything that was wrong with me, so I still hear her voice, though she said she told me for my own good. My mother who loved the feel of the earth on her hands, who smelled the flour and spices, who baked thousands of loaves of bread, cooked innumerable fragrant meals for her children and grandchildren in her basement kitchen. My mother who taught me how to laugh. My mother who could not read or write, and though she wanted to go to school, my father wouldn't let her. Women don't need to go to school, he said. My mother who did not know how much money my father had in the bank and never wrote a check. My mother who wanted to know how to do everything. My mother who could quote poems she memorized in third grade in Italy before she had to leave school. My mother who drew an imaginary line around us to keep us close. The front stoop, our boundary, the family, our country. Her little sturdy body, better than any magic charm. My mother whose skin turned orange before she died, though the week before she got sick, she planted a huge garden. We were sure she was too powerful to die. Even now, 10 years, actually 25 years after the funeral procession led us to Calvary Cemetery at the mausoleum door they filed you in. I wish I could drive over to your house and find you there, your earthy humor, your warm arms that always were the place I call home. And I'm going to move on to another poem, which is in a different book. Just wait a second, just got to get to it. And it's called All His Life, My Father Worked in Factories. And when I worked in factories during the summer, all I did was moan and complain about how awful it was and I'd never make it through and how could I stand it. Meanwhile, my mother and father did this for like 55 years of their lives in Paterson. So it was very nervy of me to feel that I had the right to complain. Of course, now I can't find the poem. I thought I had marked it, but I guess I didn't. Just wait. 1 second, I promise. Oh, shit. Just a second. I'm not supposed to be swearing on this. Of course, I swear all the time, so I guess I shouldn't expect. Oh, I don't know. I'll find it. It's in another book. I'll find it in another book if I can't find it there. I'm going to read a poem that I wrote the last time I was in Detroit, and it's called, I feel like I'm losing my mind here. In the classroom at Wayne State, Detroit, thanks to ML. The students are crowded into a space too small for all of them. But they are doing what I asked. Their pens move across their notebooks. I want them to write the best poem they've ever written. One that is filled with the truth they've been afraid to know. One that would change their lives, like the woman at the reception the other day who told me I had changed hers. And now, when I look at the bent heads and concentration of these students, I hope some magic will happen in the classroom today, some spark that will turn ordinary words into stars. You know how you love your students. Even students that are somebody else's students, but you still love them. This poem is called Grief. My husband died, I can't believe it, 10 years ago in early May. Grief. I have been grieving for a long time now. So many of those I loved gone. I remember remaining behind in a house that's suddenly too big for me. I had out in the back room, sitting in my brown recliner, the kind I've always hated because it smacks of illness and old age. Now I joke I am having an affair with my chair, with its pillowy velvet arms, the way it welcomes me home, the way I fall asleep in it as though I were a child and it were a cradle. I've been grieving for a long time now. Wish I could call you all back, and sometimes I imagine you are with me. In my dreams, you seem so alive. You come to comfort me, though when I wake up, you have vanished. But I am learning gratitude for another April, the world in its radiance dancing into spring. And I am here to greet it, my arms open, my feet doing their own quiet dance. It's so hard to give up thank you. It's so hard to give up the people we love. And they kind of stay with you, don't they? They come back and you feel like they're really still there. This is a poem about my daughter, whom I absolutely adore, obviously. My daughter at two, my daughter was graceful as a dancer, her head covered in gold curls. Once a friend made her a bright blue dress with a matching purse. I took a picture of her in the backyard in Overland Park, Kansas. I could not believe how beautiful she was. Her face tilted toward the sun, her eyes so blue they could be sapphires. My daughter at 46 is in love. For so long, she felt betrayed by love and would not venture out of the safety of her condo. But when she met Stephen, she seemed transformed. She sends a picture of herself with Stephen and his children. Indigo, his little girl, is holding onto her arm, and Atticus, his son at 12, looks almost grown up, his shoulders growing wide, his face a younger version of his father's. Indigo could be Jennifer's daughter, even though she isn't. And I think back at Jennifer, too, when I see Indigo posing, her hand on her hip, a feather boa wrapped around her shoulders. And I think of Jen, how she looked when I took that picture in the Kansas sun. And of Jennifer, 11 years married, walking into my arms and sobbing, all the golden glow that lit her up at 2 and at 16 and on our wedding day, all but gone. And now once again, her face so luminous when she looks at Stephen, her hand in Indigo's hand, her arm on Atticus' shoulder. Isn't that what you want? We want for our children, for them to come out the other side of all the terrible that can happen to people, right?
Yes.
That is, wait a second, let me check the time. Okay. What do we know, Jill? Oh, wait, I think it must be in here. I want to see if I can find the factory poem about my father, since I always seem to have written it down correctly as the in the right place. But if I can't, well, I guess you're not missing much. Okay, I'm going to read Trading in the VW Bus. When we moved back to New Jersey, we bought a house without seeing it, an own place in Hawthorne, across from my sister's home. We drove to New Jersey in our VW bus, and soon after we settled in, my sister said, "Listen, you have to get rid of that bus. The neighbors are talking. They think you're hippies. This is not that kind of neighborhood." So we gave in, sold the VW camper, and instead bought a Ford Pinto station wagon, dark green and sedate, unimaginative as mud. I loved the VW bus, the camping trips we took in it to Colorado and New Mexico and Arizona, the table that turned into a bed, the built-in booths that held sheets and blankets and pillows, the board we placed across the front seat so John, who was only 4, could sleep on it, and the crib we placed in the back for Jennifer. Letting the VW bus go was admission we were no longer as young as we'd been, that we'd have to move into adulthood in a way we had not before. A life of suburban homeowners, just like that boring green Pinto. That car almost shouted, "We are careful, frugal adults." Though we had just turned 30, we would have liked to pretend we were flower children forever. And oh, my son hated that car when he was 17. He just hated it. Said, it's so stodgy. How could you buy that car? Well, I was easily pushed around by my sister. That's how I could buy that car. And I'm going to finish with a poem from Silence in the Empty House. And it's a poem of grief, both for my husband's death and because at the time that he died, it was the time of the BP oil spill. And I had so much trouble writing about his death. We were married 46 years. He was sick a long time, but it was still very hard to let go and not to imagine that he was sitting in the room with me. I'd turn around, I'd be talking to him, there would be nobody there. Anyway, I also feel that we've wrecked the world. We're not careful with the beautiful things we're given. And so, in a way, that carelessness is causing us to wreck the natural world. And I think sometimes that carelessness also leads us not to understand how lucky we are to have people who love us and whom we love. Watching the pelican die. On TV, I watched the pelican with its mouth wide open, its wings and body coated with oil. Is it screaming? I do not hear the sound. And since this is a photograph, I don't know if it was caught in that mouth stretched howl when it died, or it's howling in recognition that cannot survive the thick coat of oil that bears it down. The ladies who take care of you when I'm gone tell me you're having trouble. His hands, they say, his hands. When I come home, see your hands have turned black at the tips and the ends of your fingers have been eaten away. I watched the dead bird in the Gulf floating on top of the water, its legs stiff and straight in the air, his body drained of all motion, all light. The announcer on CNN says BP didn't want the photographer to take pictures of dying birds covered as they are with a black slick of oil. They were hoping, he says, that the birds would sink and the evidence would be swallowed by the ocean. In the late afternoon, I hear my daughter cry out. I rush to see what's happened, and you are stretched out on the bed, your body so thin, you look like a boy. I call 911. The ambulance takes you to the hospital. BP is trying to put a cap on a spewing oil rig. The CEO keeps saying, it's no problem. Clumps of oil wash ashore and float on the surface of the water. The beach is littered with dead fish and birds. At the hospital, they want to know whether we want extraordinary measures. No, I say, he has a living will. We hover around while they admit you have forgotten how to speak. Most of you lie in bed, staring into a space above our heads. I reach out to hold your hand, stroke your forehead. Dennis, I call out, Dennis, you do not hear. The neurologist arrives. He says, well, he should have been dead 5 years ago. What did you expect? You shouldn't have taken such good care of him. We did everything we could, the BP president says, looking directly at the camera. It's not such a calamity. We don't need to stop deep water drilling. Our economy will collapse if we do. The social worker tells us, you should put him in a nursing home. My brother tells me, you kept him home all this time. If he gets a little stronger, I'll let him go home and he'll be around the things he knows. Another doctor enters the room. He's not going to make it, he says. The social worker admonishes us with her bag of common sense. She does not love you. We take you home. I sit next to you and hold your hand. The MSNBC reporter stands on the beach in a hurricane and picks up a huge glob of oil with a stick. Look, she says, look, and drips the oil on the white sand. She's shaking with fury at such destruction. Dead birds float behind her. I'm in so much pain, you say, though you haven't complained before. We feed you a jar of bakery applesauce. You open your mouth and accept the food. When I see the pelican on TV with its mouth wide open in horror, I remember you as you lay dying. On the Gulf, the earth and the sea are being destroyed, just as you were by the disease that finally defeated you. Some things are bigger than all of us. We cannot defeat them. If there is enough carelessness and greed in the world, even the ocean can be destroyed. And you who fought against this illness with such courage, even you cannot survive. The blackened tips of your fingers oil heavy on the bird's feathers, the bird's dead and floating on the surface that gradually sink and disappear. Thank you.
Bravo, bravo.
Wonderful.
Bravo.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Great poem, Marie.
I can never tell whether you can hear me or whether I can hear you. I don't know.
I know. But we hear
We
you.
hear ya. We hear ya.
We heard you, believe me. Wonderful.
Thank
It was a really strong, I mean, not my reading, but the other two readings were very strong.
No, Maria, my Maria. Brilliant, brilliant, my friend.
All of these readings were amazing.
They were amazing, weren't they? I mean, I'm not saying, not me, these others.
Yes, you.
Yes, yes, you,
Yes,
Maria.
absolutely you.
Why can't you be included in that?
And you know, it's an honor to read with you, Maria and Rod, and an honor for me. So thank you, Maria and Rod.
An honor for me too. And thank you very much, ML.
Thank you.
It's
It's an
Troy,
honor.
hope you're having a better time than we are here in New Jersey with the virus, but I don't think we are.
Well, we're not going out. So.
Yeah, we could talk. We could talk.
The two of you gave outstanding readings. It was an honor to be reading with you.
Thank you, Rod. Thank
This
you,
is really, really good. The first one,
Jim.
two women.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you so much,
Just finished.
Chanel and everyone. The readings were just terrific.
It was really a treat to hear every single one of your voices. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you for the wonderful readings. A wonderful afternoon on the
Hello,
Sunday.
Mary Jo.
No picture.
Thank you, Linda.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rod.
Thank
I
you.
want
Hi,
to,
Rod.
So,
I want to thank everybody for reading. Rod Torreson, Linda Nemec Foster, and of course Maria Mazziotti Gillan. The next reading is going to be on May 31st with Lolita Hernandez, and she will be joined.
He's really good.
Hey, who was that? I love you.
Really good.
I better mute everybody for a minute.
I can't get this straight.
Anyway, so again, thanks to those folks for reading today. And in 2 weeks, Lolita Hernandez, Carolyn Maughan, Joel Fluent Green, and some piano music by Frankie the K. So thanks everyone. I really appreciate you taking a little bit of time today. Thanks to our readers once again. And I'll unmute everybody.
Thanks, ML.
Thank you,
ML.
Thank you,
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, ML.
Thank you,
Very
everybody.
much.
Good to see a lot of you. Linda, thanks for that Grateful Dead mask. I'll be wearing it proudly. I'll be flying that flag proudly. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you, Linda.
And my friends and my family, thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting us.
Stay safe.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Robin. I'll send you
Bye.
an email soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe.